Thanks so much, Sam. It's a pleasure to be here, and thanks everybody for joining. As Sam was mentioning, so today's webinar is entitled Health Tech Focused Customer Discovery. We're really going to be digging deep into the activities of customer discovery, really understanding what it is and how we can use it to de-risk commercialization. The focus is going to be mostly on healthcare technologies, but I think you'll find that especially the process of customer discovery is applicable really, across any industry. So thank you for the introduction as well, Sam. I'll keep my background a small part of this, but just to provide a bit of context on some of the experiences that I've had, particularly around customer discovery and early stage companies. I am really focused on really within healthcare, remote patient monitoring, telehealth, machine learning, and really care management, care in the home. In addition to my work at ScienceDocs, I'm working on a few exciting projects, one of which is leading the commercialization at a company named Lazarus Enterprises, which is an early stage company that is developing AI models to detect cancer early. Right now we're focused on dermatology and also developing models for cervical, ovarian, and lung cancer. Also working on an exciting project, MIT spin-out named Luco Labs, leading their business development. This is an in-home device that can non-invasively monitor neutrophil count. So this is specifically designed for cancer patients undergoing chemotherapy, in which neutropenic infections is the leading cause of hospitalizations and ER visits. By having a device in the home that can non-invasively test neutrophil count, the goal is to prevent these downstream complications. And then lastly, working with a company named NQ Medical, commercializing a machine learning remote patient monitoring technology that's used to detect neurodegenerative diseases like Parkinson's disease early by looking at and analyzing keystroke behavior, both mechanically and cognitively, things like flight time and also complexity of words and sentences. All three of these projects are really ripe for customer discovery and really thinking about product market fit as they're quite early stage. Before these projects, where I'm still an advisor, I was leading the commercialization of a smart floor mat at a company named Podometrics. This floor mat is in-home and it is for patients that are at high risk of developing diabetic foot ulcers. It's able to detect 97% of diabetic foot ulcers 5 weeks before they happen. I was the first employee at that company, which now has nearly 30, and in the course of 4 years, was able to take the technology from FDA clearance to about $10 million in revenue, and with a national contract with the VA, where happily more than 2,000 veterans wake up every morning and step on their mat to hopefully prevent diabetic foot ulcers and improve their quality of life. I've had previous startup experience outside of healthcare, and interestingly, my background is an engineer, as a naval architect, which is where I started my career. We're going to dive into, before even talking about customer discovery, thinking about why startups fail. And before I really dive into this, I wanted to just kind of kick off our webinar with a quick poll. And so, Sam, hopefully you can help me out with this. So just as we're getting going, I think it would be helpful to kind of understand from everyone where you are professionally now, is it primarily internally facing, technical development, operations, product development, or is it more externally facing? Are you a business development professional, client engagement? I think it would be helpful in how I discuss customer discovery, just to get a little bit of a feel from it. So I'll let everybody have a couple of seconds to do that, and we'll see the results. Okay, here we go. 69% of us are externally facing. I just put externally facing as well. And 31% of us are internally facing. That's great. Great to know. And thanks everybody for helping with that. So why do startups fail? Why do early stage companies fail? There have been a lot of surveys that have looked at this. And I've just gathered information from one of them, from CB Insights, that basically did an autopsy of 101 startup failures, and looked at what happened basically. And it really all revolves around not understanding our customers. So out of the top 20 reasons, 9 of them were related to customers, and out of the top 10, half of them were related to customers. And the number one reason was that the product or the service didn't have a market fit, which is devastating, isn't it? Obviously, technical development from the lab, early seed funding, de-risking, clinical if we're in healthcare, technology risk. Finally getting to market, again, if we're on the healthcare side, usually some regulatory pathway through the FDA here in the US, and you get to market and you have something that customers don't want. And boy, that is devastating. And I think when you get to a certain point where you're anticipating selling and commercializing and you find you don't have a fit, it's not impossible to pivot, but it's sure tough. I think you probably lose some credibility with your current investors. It's certainly not a great story for future investors. And so we're really going to talk about how can we do some work and run some experiments here to prevent this from happening. Because, at the end of the day, not understanding customers is not a good reason to fail. We can understand our customers, and the way that we do that is through customer discovery. So I think it's helpful, as we're spending the next hour together, to at least come up with some kind of definition for what is customer discovery. The process of gathering, analyzing feedback from external stakeholders to test commercialization-based hypotheses is probably a decent definition. Really, at the core of it, what we're doing is we're running an experiment. I think everybody here is familiar with the scientific method. Even if we're not scientists ourselves, we understand the importance of running an objective experiment where we're setting controls and we are validating or invalidating hypotheses. It would be madness to try to commercialize a technology, a device, or a product or a service based on not using rigorous methods in technical development. And yet I think there's a tendency on the customer side that there's some kind of magic or some kind of something that kind of transcends science or rigorous method in evaluating these things, and it's just absolutely not the case. Customer discovery is running an experiment with external parties. So why is it important? Well, we don't want to fail, right? So if that's the number one reason why startups are failing, early stage companies, they don't understand their customer, well, that's super important. But it's obviously more nuanced than that. As leaders putting together a strategy, a commercialization strategy of how we're going to go to market, we have to make assumptions and we have to put inputs into our models. And the more that we can de-risk those inputs and have great confidence of them, the better business strategy that we'll have, the more of a sound business strategy that we'll have. And there's all kinds of really, really important topics that we can craft hypotheses around. I've got a few here, value propositions. Are we going after an unmet need? That's super important to dig down into. We need to, really quantify what this issue is, a kind of cheeky calling it a pants on fire issue, but we really need to be going after something where there's a market need. And we need to talk to people outside, our future customers and stakeholders and people in our ecosystem, to really understand if what we're developing is really addressing that in a very, very concrete way. Our customer segments, who is buying this, who is using this, what does the entire ecosystem look like in healthcare that is notoriously complicated. You have insurance companies, health plans, you have hospital systems, you have private insurance, you have all different types of levels of institutions. You might have research, level university hospitals, or you might have community clinics. Of course, we also layer on fee for service, kind of the traditional reimbursement versus value-based reimbursement. And value-based care and how that changes incentives, and are we positioning something in the right way for there to be a transaction and a market, and then thinking about our go-to-market strategy. Are we aligning company milestones with our go-to-market strategy? So in other words, let's say we've raised a seed round and we're going through kind of a regulatory pathway now, and we know that we have a certain amount of capital to get us to our Series A. What kind of milestones are we looking to achieve, and what are those resources, in terms of capital and time, to get us there? We're going to talk about this, but customer discovery, it's a little bit broader than just talking to what could be prospective customers. We also need to talk to regulatory experts, maybe VCs, maybe CEOs of companies that have gone down a similar path, to understand what are the costs and what are the timelines associated with our goals. So at the end of the day, what we're looking to do is we're really looking to create a playbook before the game even begins, and that way, we're going into commercial activities with a water-tested plan. And of course, you can plan as much as you like, but it is also an iterative process to continue getting feedback. So I think the best way for us to talk through this together is through a concrete process. And I'm sure this is not in a textbook or anything like this. I think probably you can structure this in different steps or different kinds of ways to put this process together. But this is the best way that I think about it. Essentially a 5-step process, and we're gonna dive deep into each of these steps. And I just thought it would also be helpful to create a fictitious case, which might help us discuss with a concrete example some of these steps and some of the activities, and even for future questions, it just might be a helpful example. So let's talk about these steps. So the first step is setting our value hypotheses, our commercialization hypotheses. The second step is researching targets within our ecosystem of where we're going to be operating that will give us good external feedback to test these hypotheses. Then we have to reach out to these people and ask them to talk to us. And there's some I think tips that I can provide that will hopefully be helpful for everybody with that I know sometimes can be a stressful or a piece of the puzzle, then we actually have to conduct the interviews, and we need to record the data in a systematic way, where we then can use that information to either validate or invalidate our hypotheses. And when we finish with step 5 and we have our validated or invalidated hypotheses, then we can take those inputs and put them into our business strategy and kind of wrap everything else around it. So our fictitious case, which I just completely made up, and it's quite silly, but let's call this OnColoSense, and we're going to think of this as an in-home device that basically takes all of the reasons that you would go to the hospital to receive chemotherapy if you're a cancer patient, and allows you to do it at home. Who knows if this is even possible or feasible? Who knows if this is even addressing market needs? But essentially, let's imagine a device where literally it's a delivery mechanism where you're putting drugs in, and it has some kind of sensor system that's looking at your biomarkers, and it's able to dose the amount of chemotherapy drugs and the regimens to basically automate this entire process. Okay, so, excuse me. The first step, we want to quantify our objectives. We want to set our hypotheses. So, what are the objectives that are important? Let's use the example with OnColoSense to de-risk their go-to-market pathway. Well, what unmet need are we addressing? That's super important to understand. So patients can currently do this in the clinic. So this is allowing them to do it now in the home. Is that valuable? Certainly with a lot of in-home technologies, especially with what's going on with COVID. I think you can argue, keeping immunocompromised patients in the home does have value, tangible value in terms of their clinical outcomes, preventing, obviously, bad clinical outcomes with COVID and other kinds of infections. But what kind of performance do we need to achieve? Is this something where, we need a nurse to come in the home to load up the drugs? Is this something where we need some kind of monitoring back to the care team? Do they still need to go into the hospital anyway, and there really isn't a need for this? So that's going to be really important for us through our questions to kind of to understand and dig into kind of fastidiously. Is there a certain beachhead market that would be really, really wise for us to target out of the gate? This could be by tumor type. Perhaps breast cancer patients would be better suited for something like this, as opposed to cervical cancer patients. Are there differences within where they're getting their care that would make this interesting? So finding where the need is most acute within our ecosystem is very helpful in starting to craft our commercial strategy. And here's another example. What level of clinical evidence is required? Let's say that our first step that we want to do commercially with hospital systems is to pilot. As we're thinking of our company milestones, obviously we need to show some level of clinical evidence, but how much? Is a more informal study that takes months and costs hundreds of thousands of dollars, reaching the bar, as opposed to having to run a large randomized control trial that could cost millions of dollars. Let's say multi-center and could take years to accomplish. Well, answering that question is super important. I mean, that can change the course of how a company will fund and grow and approach the market. And by talking to the right people, we could answer these questions. Next, we want to select the interviewees. We want to research, who are the right people for us to talk to. And I think a really important first step in doing this is establishing what I call an external ecosystem. We want to understand who's going to buy this? Whose budget is this coming out of? Is this coming out of, kind of the let's say procurement within the hospital? Who's going to be using it? Obviously, in this case, for our case study, this is going to be patients, cancer patients that are receiving chemotherapy in the home, who are natural champions, medical oncologists, hematologists. There's a whole web to really, kind of draw out, and you may want to diagram this out to really kind of understand who are the major players, and who do we want to speak with. For each hypothesis, we have to think about how many interviewees, how many data points do we want in order to validate or invalidate. I would suggest at least 10 data points, and I would think that you would want even more. Really, there's a little bit of feel with this in terms of the strength of the signal that you're getting. If back to the example that we're using in the past, if the level of clinical evidence is an RCT, and you talk to 10 medical oncologists and they all say we need to see an RCT before we want to champion this, well, then you probably have your answer. If it's a bit inconclusive, if you're seeing some differences in subgroups, you may want to have 20 or more interviews. I don't know if anybody here on the call has ever been part of the NIH I-Corp program, which is a great program that really dives very deep into customer discovery. I had the pleasure of earlier this year being in that program, and you have to do 100 customer interviews in the course of about 2.5 months, and it's a bit daunting as you're starting. But I think that the number 100 is a bit arbitrary as well. But at the end of the day, when you finish the program, it's certainly, in most cases, is enough data to really get a feel for validating or. Let me jump back into it. Sorry about that. Little hiccup in the Wi-Fi there. Sam, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, great. Okay, so let's dive right back in. Sorry about that, everyone. So let's now talk about outreach to our interviewees. So we've researched the right people. We want to then have these conversations. I would suggest the first path, and I think is to use our networks to find mutual connections through the people that we've identified. A little bit longer, people are a little bit more kind of willing to share information, and as you're which I think is helpful. I think necessary part of this, and for focusing on that, I think it's really important to position this as the reason that you're asking to speak is for learning. It's not for selling. People, I think I know the majority of us are externally facing, and nobody likes to be sold to. And so I think it's a great practice to look into the work or into the kind of focus areas of the people that we're reaching out to. Say that we're developing a certain technology. We want to in this case say help cancer patients and help us understand that a bit, and then ask to speak. And I typically ask for 15 minutes. Sometimes we can get 30 minutes, but especially speaking with doctors, sometimes it's in between appointments. They're so busy, and so usually 15 minutes is reasonable. I conduct outreach both on LinkedIn and on email. I usually reach out to people on LinkedIn first and add them as a connection. And in the kind of little note that I add, I just say, this is what, we're kind of working on something new to help these patients. And it would be great to get your thoughts, something like this. And if they accept, then I usually follow up with and if they don't accept, I usually then put them on email and reach out to them by email, to create documents so that you can put all of the contacts that you're reaching out to and the dates that you're reaching out to them. And I would feel comfortable if you're not getting responses, reaching out 3 or even 4 times before saying, you may be busy. And if you receive this and would like to talk in the future, it would be great. Something like that. While conducting the interviews, I also think it's good practice to create an interview guide. You really want to asking the same people the same questions so that you can really, compare apples to apples for your hypotheses. At the example that I was giving you, the company where we did the iCorp earlier this year, we have just kept going with these same tools. We're over 140 interviews now. We just keep going. And I think when you start to create these tools, it reduces friction and allows you to kind of just keep going. When you're asking these questions, avoid yes or no questions. You really want to get more context. And really have them talk and explain things the way that they see them. I think the nuance is really important. And I think one of the most important tips that I can give is try not to prompt responses, which is super hard, especially we're invested in what we're working on. But, in the example that we were talking about, as opposed to framing a question as, would it be helpful if we could deliver chemotherapy drugs to patients at home? Start thinking about, what are the major challenges that you have caring for your patients? Start pretty broad in terms of, say, delivering care for their chemotherapy, and it might be, well, we can't get them in. We can get them in for appointments, and it's difficult now with COVID. And then you're starting to get some unprompted feedback that aligns with the unmet need. It's really hard now with everything going on in the world, but in-person meetings are better. So I think it's good practice to use an additional tool to track these responses. So for rows, have your hypotheses, and for your columns, have the people that you've spoken with. And I would also, for each of the people that you're identifying, that, the interviewees, I would also have additional identifiers. So if it's oncologists, what their tumor type is, what kind of hospital system or institution that they're working in, to be able to look for patterns. Are they treating adult or pediatric patients? I think all of those things are really important. So some concluding thoughts. Richard Feynman, the great physicist, the first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool. This is an experiment, as I mentioned, and I think it's really important to remove as much bias as you can. And if you put your heart and soul into something and you find out that there isn't a market need, well, that's okay. You can pivot. You can think about, where is the need? How do we change the product or the offering to reach the unmet need? But you want to do it as early as possible. The other thing I'll say is, this is explicitly not to sell customer discovery, but let's say that you have gone through the process of customer discovery and, you have your strategy. For some early commercial discussions, it is helpful to reach out to people and approach it as, we're looking to learn, we would like to pilot with you, let's say, but we'd like to learn, how that works at your institution, or, how you leverage technology, or how you would think of something like this, as opposed to going in and kind of giving the hard sell, which is, again, difficult to sometimes convey. So with that, and apologies for the connection issues, but I will wrap here.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that talk, Ryan. We'll now go into a Q&A session. So if you have any questions for Ryan, please feel free to put them in the Q&A box or in the chat. So the first question we have, Ryan, is at what stage in a company's tenure is it ideal to execute or start the customer discovery process?
Yeah, that's a great question. So basically, pretty early on. You know, it's hard to think, you know, why you wouldn't do it, you know, almost as early as possible. You know, you know, as you're thinking about technical development and product development, you're going to want to make sure that you're developing something that is addressing the unmet need. And so, you know, the hypotheses that you create may be different depending on what stage you're at. You know, early stage hypotheses may be very kind of milestone based in terms of regulatory pathway or clinical evidence or these kinds of things. On the other side of it, you know, even for products that have been launched, you know, there's always new products to be launched. There's always, you know, revisions or ways that you can change service. And so even as a product is launched, you can also still conduct customer discovery to understand, you know, can we go after new markets? You know, can we develop different features that will reach an unmet need? So I think it's a continuous process, and I think you can start pretty early.
So how long does a typical customer discovery process usually take?
Yeah, that's another great question. So, you know, to really go deep on these hypotheses and really generate the number of interviews, you know, you're talking about at least, I would say, a quarter of time, 3 months to do this the right way. And it's resource intensive. You know, you really want to commit to it and really go for it. So I would say that it would probably take about 3 months of time to really start to validate and invalidate these hypotheses. You're, of course, you know, after the first, let's say the first couple of weeks, you know, or first few weeks is creating that ecosystem and creating the interview guide. And then the first few weeks after that, you're starting to get some data. It's really important not to either get too happy or too discouraged with the early data that's coming out. You really want to make sure that you have enough data to draw some conclusions.
Thank you. So what would you say is the most difficult part of this customer discovery process?
I would say sometimes coming to grips with reality. You know, there can be some exciting things that come out of this. And, you know, some of the interviews, even say for the I-Corps program that we did earlier this year, were lightning. They were super exciting. And those relationships have continued, and I think will continue on, and maybe some early customers. But, you know, you may also find that you know, you need to pivot a bit, or, you know, what you thought is not correct, and you need to think about it in a different way. And that's difficult.
I guess just one last question is, but what are some examples of ways you can use customer discovery for a product already on the market?
Yeah, so I think one important way is thinking about new markets that you can enter. I spoke about, you know, finding a beachhead market early on, and, you know, I think that's important to get traction in, but then leveraging that to go to different markets, which could be, you know, different customer segments, different geographic markets. I think is a great way to use customer discovery for a product that's already on market.